Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our 7th day of memory. I'm Natasha Rattu, the Director of Karma Nirvana, and it is such an incredible honour and a privilege to be having this important platform today. We've got some incredible speakers lined up for you, including our Survivor Ambassadors, the Domestic Abuse Commissioner, and the Minister for Safeguarding, Minister Atkins, all of whom will be supporting this event in honouring the memories of those that we have lost in the name of so-called honour. And I just want to start by thanking our incredible speakers for being here with us today to mark this really important day, and to thank all of you for being here with us in the audience as we honour the memories of those we have lost. And we want to tell you a little bit about why Karma Nirvana started this campaign 7-8 years ago now, and why in particular it falls on the 14th of July. But before I get into that, I just want to let our audience know that today we'll be covering some content that will be quite difficult and hard-hitting and distressing at times, and I'm very conscious that some of the content may trigger our own personal experiences. So if anybody does feel like they need to take time out, it's really important that you do that. And please know that we have staff available to you as well today. My colleague Alex will be putting her details in the Q&A, so if anybody would like to speak, please do contact Alex directly. Whilst it's really important that we do listen and we hear the lived experiences of victims of honour-based abuse, it is so incredibly important that we look after ourselves in that process. So a little bit in housekeeping. All delegates can communicate via the Q&A, so you'll see that we have a little tab at the top for you to pose questions. You can pose those questions throughout the day. We're going to have some dedicated time later on to deal with your questions. Teams Live doesn't allow you to speak, so the Q&A is really going to be our only way to communicate throughout the day. Announcements by the Karma Nirvana team will be shown on the Q&A panel for information, and there won't be any breaks today. So if you do need to have a break or leave the session for whatever reason, you can just pause the video and then play it on your return and you won't miss a thing. For today's event, we'll be using the hashtag #WeRemember. So please do use that tweet and share your insights for today's event and upload it to your social so that we can make as much noise as possible about honour-based abuse and about these really important issues. So the 14th of July. The 14th of July is the birthday of Shafeelia Ahmed. Shafeelia, you can see on the PowerPoint that's coming up, she was a courageous, funny, bright, intelligent young girl who had the best of a very bright future ahead of her. But on the 11th of September 2003, Shafeelia's life was cut short. She was murdered by the very people that were there to love really and protect her, her parents. In previous Day Memory events, we've had Shafeelia's school friend Melissa Harrigan come and share her memories of Shafeelia when they were at school. But unfortunately, Melissa, who is a teacher in the pandemic, hasn't been able to take time off today to join us, although she sends her best to our audience. So what I wanted to do was to read you some of the highlights from Shafeelia's lived experiences through the sentencing remarks that the judge had given when sentencing her mother and father for her murder. It will give you a sense of what her experiences were and really why we're here today marking this day. So he said, "The jury has found you both guilty for the murder of your daughter Shafeelia. She was 17 years of age when you killed her. What was it that brought you to her parents, the people that had given her life to the point of killing her? Shafeelia was a determined, able and ambitious girl who wanted to live a life which was normal in the country and in the town in which you had chosen to live and bring up your children. However, you could not tolerate the life that Shafeelia wanted to live. You wanted your family to live in Pakistan, in Warrington. Although she went to local schools, you objected to her socialising with girls from what you have referred to as the white community, and you objected to her wearing clothes that were Western and objected to her having contact with boys. She was being squeezed between two cultures, the culture and the way of life that she saw around her and wanted to embrace, and the culture and the way of life you wanted to impose upon her. A desire that she understood and appreciated the cultural heritage from which she came from is perfectly understandable, but an expectation that she live in a sealed cultural environment separate from the culture of the country in which she lived was unrealistic, destructive and cruel. The conflict between you and her increased in the last year of her life, and you tried to impose your beliefs and attitudes on her by intimidation, bullying, and the use of physical violence. She tried to escape, and she was determined to do so because she knew what lay in store for her at your hands, being taken to Pakistan to be sorted out, i.e. having her Western ideas removed and to be married off. She ran away in February 2003, but you recaptured her, dragged her off the streets and forced her into your car, and a week later she was drugged and taken to Pakistan. I have no doubt that your intention was that she should remain in Pakistan and be married there. There came a time in Pakistan when she realised what her immediate future was going to be, and she self-harmed by drinking bleach in order to frustrate your plans. She seriously injured herself and her condition deteriorated to such an extent that after she'd been left in Pakistan, she was no longer wanted as a bride. She was brought back to the UK where she received prolonged hospital treatment. And on her discharge from hospital, even in her weakened condition, she continued to want freedom and to live the life she wanted for herself. On the evening of the 11th of September 2003, you berated her for her behaviour, and in temper and frustration, you too suffocated her. It was you, Farhana Ahmed, who said to your husband, "Finish it here." While I accept there was no pre-existing plan to kill Shafila that night, that remark, together with evidence relating to whether or not Shafila survived the drinking of bleach, drives me to the conclusion that you two had previously discussed the way that you might ultimately resolve the problem which Shafila presented to you. Your problem was that in what you have referred to in your community, Shafila's conduct was bringing shame upon you, and your concern about being shamed in your community was greater than the love for your child. Those were his sentence and remarks right at the end. Now, when a person passes away, their memory and their legacy usually continues through close family and friends. But when it is your close family and friends or your community that are responsible for your death because they view you as shameful and dishonourable, who then keeps your memory alive? Now, this was a question that we at Karma Nirvana posed 8 years ago before launching our first ever annual Day of Memory on the 14th of July 2015 on what would have been Shafila's 29th birthday. We had a huge celebration, a huge event whereby we remembered all those lost in the name of honour, and we celebrated their memory, ensuring that their lives were remembered to help others. We're going to play a short show reel of some of our previous Day Memory events, as we want to share with you how we've celebrated these events in the past, particularly for those of you in our audience that are new to our Day of Memory event. The Day of Memory is the most important day in our calendar every year without a doubt. And sadly, this is the second time that we've had to hold a virtual event. It's absolutely not our preferred way of doing things. We want to have a huge celebration of the lives of those that have been lost to remember them. So please do save this date for next year, because we'll be holding a real live virtual event, not a virtual event, a live event. And we hope that you will all join us in doing so. So I'm going to ask our tech team to now play the show reel that our designers have pulled together for today's event.
my son Arash Qurbani, who was murdered 20th of November 2004. And they call it honor killing, but there is no honor in any killing.
The father and the two sons ambushed him in his car and stabbed him 46 times and made a drain out of my bone.
Late nights, lions, friends, films, water fights, bike rides, barbecues, family holiday, woohoo! Pack, go to the airport, board the plane, touchdown, see the sights, meet new people. Decisions made, forced into marriage, raped, beaten, abused.
80% of UK forced marriages happen abroad, mostly during the summer holidays. If you or a friend are at risk, visit karmanirvana.org.uk or call 0800 5999 247 for confidential help and support.
Growing up in the travelling community, you was really just expected to look after your family. You weren't expected to get an education or do anything really, apart from get married, have children. Oh, it was such a big shame when I left him. Yeah, I should never, ever have left. Even now, 18 years later, people still say that I should never have left him. You know, so it was a big shame on him that he couldn't keep hold of his wife. I want other women in the gypsies community to know that they don't have to suffer, they don't have to be beaten, they don't have to not have a life, that there's a whole world out there and there's people that will help them get out, you know, and that they can go on to have meaningful lives.
Morning everyone, and welcome to Karma Nirvana's 6th day of memory.
Thank you so much everybody that has signed on today. That it's like amazing really.
Thank you very much to Karma Nirvana for inviting me this morning.
Hello. I would much have preferred to be in a group at this Memorial Day event.
Good morning to everybody. It's a delight to join you, even if it is for the next just 5 more minutes. Can I say firstly, this is a really important day for all of us now.
Good morning everyone. Thank you so much for that introduction, Natasha. I really appreciate it. I want to start off by saying thank you for having me, Karma Nirvana.
Wow. Okay. Can we breathe now, please? And can I remind us how we all bleed the same colour and how we're in this together, united we stand. The vision that I had in 1993 is unfolding before my eyes in the terms of the number of people who are now breaking the silences. And I would like you to continue with that. Thank you for listening.
Wow, that was quite emotional to watch back and just remember the days that we've held in the past and how far we've come and how much noise we've made about this. The fact that we have an annual day is just incredible. So we've taken you on a bit of a journey to understand why we hold the National Day of Memory and why it's so important to us. Today's Day of Memory event is all about the future, specifically how we collectively can bring honour-based abuse into the mainstream. We know that despite the heightened profile of honour-based abuse for decades, it's still an invisible issue, but it's thriving, and we're calling to change that, which is why today we're launching our first strategy, which we've titled Shining the Spotlight, because vitally this is what we all need to do. Our Shining the Spotlight strategy has been a labour of love, and I'll be honest, agony at time as we've set out our detailed plans for the next 3 years as to how we plan to tackle honour-based abuse, really thinking through the detail, including ways that you can support us in this too. I'll talk you through our priorities later on in the conference, but feel it's really important to highlight first and foremost that honour-based abuse is a form of domestic abuse. So in whatever way you're responding to domestic abuse, you cannot leave victims of honour-based abuse behind, which is why we're so delighted to have one of my shearers for sure, the Domestic Abuse Commissioner Nicole Jacobs, here to talk today to set this into context. But before I invite Nicole to come and speak, I just want to share our exciting agenda for the rest of today's event. So after Nicole has spoken, you're going to hear from our courageous Ambassador Nour Norris, whose sister and niece were tragically murdered in August 2018. Nour is going to courageously share her lived experiences of the sister and her niece. You'll also be hearing from our fantastic data and case analyst, Anne Bonner, who will be sharing our data insights, including insights from the pandemic and the impact that we've seen. After Anne, we're going to share a little bit of update on our vital campaigns to end child marriage and virginity testing. And we're so grateful to have Pauline Latham MP and our fantastic Ambassador Farhana here to talk about our child marriage campaign, and Dr. Charlotte Proudman and Nimco Ali to tell you about our virginity myths campaign, particularly on why it's so vitally needed right now. After our campaign updates, we're going to share our vision for the next 3 years, and in that we'll highlight how Karma Nirvana intends to end honour-based abuse, and I'll talk you through our vision and how we see the problem and how we intend to provide solutions to it with your support. And finally, our closing remarks will come from the Safeguarding Minister Victoria Atkins and our founder Jasvinder Sanghera. We'll also have an opportunity to answer some of your questions, which of course we want you to post throughout the day, so please keep posting those. Our moderators will be looking for any themed questions and we will pull them all together at the end. So let's get this show on the road without any further delay. I'm really proud to introduce our next speaker. Nicole Jacobs is the first Domestic Abuse Commissioner in England and Wales, and we've been working really closely with Nicole and her amazing team throughout the pandemic. For me, personally, to have somebody like Nicole tackling domestic abuse so articulately and so passionately with the inclusion of honour-based abuse is so refreshing, because very often these issues are left behind and aren't even considered a form of domestic abuse. And I remember quite clearly at last year's Day of Memory event, Nicole was in the audience and posted in the chat during the event that we could count on her for support. And I am so proud to report a year on that she is a woman of her word. So without further ado, I'm going to now hand over to the fantastic Nicole Jacobs.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so humbled by that introduction, and really humbled by the whole of that, the video, the introduction, and hearing those sentencing remarks, and hearing more about the life of Shafila Ahmed. And I just love the idea of the whole of this event, which is about finding ways to have a memory, and recognizing how important it is to remember people who have been killed by so-called honor-based violence, and also the diversity of victims that we saw in that video. And I just wanted to say just a special thank you to the team at Karma Nirvana and Natasha particularly. You as an organization have done so much to bring this issue to the fore, to allow us all to understand better, and really show incredible public leadership about these issues, and making some really tangible changes. I think about the calls that I've been sharing over the last year during COVID, and Karma Nirvana telling us for much of the year, week on week, but in more recent months, every couple of weeks, but about the incredible work they've been doing all year, despite huge challenges, the increases in calls they've had, the concerns they've had in terms of increases in calls, but also decreases in calls from elsewhere, schools and other places like that. And just thinking of how much you've adapted your services over the year, and how much you've been able to influence our discussions, particularly within government, about what's needed, where we're headed. And I'm so excited about the shining the spotlight strategy, because I will pick it up and make sure that I am doing everything I can to support you and making sure you achieve that strategy. It's so important, and it's so important the work that you've done. My name is Nicole Jacobs, and I'm not sure if everyone watching this will have met me before or heard me speak. I'm a relatively new commissioner, so I'd like to just explain a little bit about my role and what I do, and then I was about to say I might tell you a few of the boring bits. I'm sure the rest of this agenda will be much more interesting in some ways, but I wanted to also highlight for you from the perspective of my role as the commissioner, kind of what are the key opportunities for us that we can work together and influence change at a government level, and just talk about a few priorities for my office this year that relate to honor-based violence. So first, I was appointed a little over a year ago as a designate. As Natasha said, I remember very clearly watching the event last year and the incredible speakers, and really feeling quite humbled again by just needing to learn more, understand more. I think with everything in relation to these issues, we all think we know a good amount. I've worked in this area for over 20 years, my entire career really, in the US, but predominantly here in the UK. And I was learning a lot myself. And so we all have a lot of a need to be humble and learn and think about ways that we improve and do things differently. My role is one that is appointed by government, so I'm a public appointee, but I'm independent, so technically an arm's length body. In the same way you heard Vera Baird last year at this conference, who was on the video earlier, the victims commissioner, or there's a children's commissioner, there's other types of commissioners. And although we can differ a little bit in some of the powers of the office, essentially we are there to both advise but also hold government to account, and public services. So I think of my role as very cooperative. We spend a lot of time day in, day out, working with officials within government across all departments, really trying to amplify the work of Karma Nirvana, but also all of the issues in relation to domestic abuse and those kind of very linked issues of sexual violence, stalking and harassment, all of those things that you could imagine that link so closely. And we are also there, though, to hold a very high expectation of government and want to see the very best happening. And that means sometimes we'll differ, we may have differing opinions, we may look and find ways of holding government to account that are really healthy and productive to make sure that we really drive change and really move things forward in a faster way. So my role is sitting and is created, in fact, in the Domestic Abuse Act, which was passed in the end of October. That act did many, many things. One of the things it did was create a statutory role of the Domestic Abuse Commissioner. As Natasha said, I firmly believe that so-called honor-based violence is part and parcel of domestic abuse. It's one and the same in terms of my view of the definition of domestic abuse. And I think we know from Karma Nirvana this year, talking about, very high correlation, 90-some percentage of the people who they are helping is in the context of family. And so obviously we have a huge link and very much acknowledge honor-based violence as part of definition. The bill or the act now gives my office a couple of powers, which are really relevant to things today, which is one is a duty for public services to cooperate when asking for information. So Natasha and I have talked about this quite a lot. There's a real need for more clear information from public services about honor-based abuse or so-called honor-based abuse. Sometimes those types of crimes get lost within other data, kind of usurped in other data. And so we need to be more clear with public services that we want to see specific data. The other power of my office is to make recommendations to public bodies that have to be responded to within 56 days. So I would really like to think, and I know it's the intention of government, that these powers will really help accelerate change in this area, because I think we know we're long overdue needing some really urgent changes. The bill itself doesn't name honor-based abuse as part of the definition, but I would say in the definition of coercion and control, our new statutory definition of domestic abuse, it's so obvious how honor-based violence fits into that definition. We also have a statutory guidance which runs alongside the Domestic Abuse Act. We'll have that out for consultation shortly, and I think that we would expect to see a pretty substantial section of that guidance that will cover honor-based abuse. So I would say anyone interested, this is the kind of thing we'd love for you to look at when it's in the public domain. I'm sure if you're following Karma Nirvana, they will be promoting it, but certainly on my Twitter page and my website, we'll make sure as soon as that's out for public consultation, you'll be aware of it. And so that's the kind of guidance that at the local level, all services will be looking to have a signal, a very strong signal of the expectation of them as public services. And so that's a really important document to look at. The other is launching very soon the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy by government. So we've had a huge consultation process. 180-some thousand citizens have fed into the consultation for this strategy. I'm sure you'll hear Victoria Atkins talking about it later today, and she's obviously been a real champion within government as our safeguarding minister, and a really long-standing advocate in post, really helping to shepherd the Domestic Abuse Act through Parliament. And we should see out very, very soon, I don't know the exact date, but I would say within the next week, a violence against women and girls strategy. And following that, there'll be a more specific domestic abuse strategy. And we know from our ministers that there will be a really strong correlation between the two, but that the domestic abuse strategy will be addressing things that really wholly sit in terms of priorities about domestic abuse. I really hope to see honor-based abuse, and I think Natasha agrees, sitting really squarely there. So those are the kinds of things that will really influence government and will be our indicators of how we're working and how the kind of framework we'd be holding government to in coming years. And I think, again, shining the spotlight is perfect timing. I'll look and I'll be comparing both documents very closely, and I'm sure we'll try to make sure that everything you have in the strategy for shining the spotlight, gets the priority it deserves. I wanted to just say a couple of things that there's so much that the Domestic Abuse Act does, and I'm sure you'll hear that throughout the day and a little bit later from the minister. There's a couple of things that it doesn't do, and I want to tell you about them as part of you understanding some of the priority in my office. One is thinking about sustainable funding for community-based services. So there will be services like Karma Nirvana, but there'll be services across the country where you'll see community-based services really differing from area to area. And that's partly the way they've built up over time, a lot of innovation, a lot of changes in our thinking about what's needed, but we really don't have a really sustainable funding framework for community-based services. That's for children, for adult survivors, for perpetrators to change, and we really need to see that. And there are two really important, again, opportunities right around the corner for us about this. One is a commitment by government that we can consult on these community-based services as part of a victims bill, which is in the next year. And so we're mapping services right now at the Domestic Abuse Commissioner's Office. We've been calling over 700 some services all week, last week and this week, and sending out a survey. And we're hoping over the next month we'll have every single one of them filling out this survey so we can have a really solid data set. One of the things that is important will be to understand, which services for by and for communities exist, where they exist, where we have gaps in services. Things like honor-based abuse, where do we have charities who are feeling confident to be able to address some of these issues at the local level. We obviously heavily rely on Karma Nirvana and really specialist charities in this area. So I think having the mapping for so many reasons really helps answer many, many questions that we have. And then with the community-based services, there's a potential to make a very strong argument in the victims bill for really making sure that we have a much more solid framework of services, which I think would take us a huge step forward in terms of where we can be at the local level all over England and Wales, and really building on that. We also have the spending review. So before I was in this role and I was working in services myself, I didn't pay very much attention to things like this, I regret to say. But obviously we've seen some real difficulty with one-year spending reviews where government is only assured of their budgets at the departmental level 1 year at a time. And that's for obvious reasons in the last couple of years. We're hoping this year the Chancellor will announce a multi-year spending review, and each department then bids into the Treasury essentially for what they want to spend money on. And so we really want to see, and I know Victoria Atkins would echo this as well when you hear from her later today, the really ambitious bids in to the Treasury for these areas of service, the kind of work that needs to happen. And we're really hoping that our mapping will help with that a good bit. I also wanted to say the work that we're doing about migrant women. So again, in the Domestic Abuse Act, while there's been some funding set aside for provision of service for migrant women that's been administered through an organization called Southall Black Sisters, there wasn't any legislative changes for survivors of domestic abuse to have recourse to public funds, even if they have insecure immigration status, if they're a student, if they have varying visa status. And we would really like to see that addressed. And that's something that we're doing quite a lot of policy work on in relation to that in my office. And it's something that I think links to some of the situations that, certainly not all, but some of the situations that relate to so-called honor-based violence. And that's something that we really need to work together on. Another issue is this idea of a firewall between police or any other service and immigration services, so that people who are worried about their immigration status, aren't sure of what their immigration status are, should never hold back from seeking public services for fear of information about them being passed along to immigration services. So there was a inspectorate report that was out at the end of last year, and now the Home Office is taking about 6 months to decide what its firm policy position will be about that. And it's something that we're really trying to work as closely as we can with government to help address. So I said that was the boring bit. I hope you find all of that interesting. These are the kind of ways behind the scenes that you see. Hopefully you're seeing me very strongly advocating for survivors and what we feel and what you feel survivors really need in terms of our services and changes. There's a good bit of our work at the Domestic Abuse Commissioner's Office, which is really trying to focus on really excellent and best practice so that we can make sure all areas know what they ought to be doing. And we have so much progress to make, but I'm really I'm really optimistic about it with partners like Karma Nirvana and so many other strong leaders. I'm so optimistic about the changes we can make. So I will hand back to Natasha, and I will certainly be listening to each and every presentation for the rest of this event, and I will be remembering Shafila Ahmed today, and so many other people in this day of memory. And I hope that in the coming year, as I'm working and my team is working, we'll continue to remember people who have lost their lives, who should be with us today, and that we should be doing absolutely everything that we possibly can to support the life-saving services and the efforts that are needed to really end honor-based abuse, as Natasha said. So thank you so much. It's a total privilege to have been here and talk to you today, and I will sit back and really take on board all of the rest of the presentations. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Nicole. You have been incredible. You shared so much insight with our audience today, so grateful to you. And I think you really hit the nail on the head when you said it's so obvious that this fits into the definition of domestic abuse. And we're just so grateful to have somebody like you, somebody incredible like you, saying that with your platform. So thank you so much. So our next speaker is Nour Norris. Now, we're proud to call Nour an ambassador for Karma Nirvana. Nour's going to share the lived experiences of her niece Raneem and sister Kaula, both tragically murdered by Raneem's ex-partner in August 2018. Nour believes that these tragic deaths could have been prevented. Raneem had reported an escalating history of domestic abuse to the police before she died, and the Independent Office on Police Conduct are currently investigating the actions of police, and their report is awaited. We will be supporting Nour in her quest for justice, so I'm now going to hand over to Nour to share her story.
Hi and good morning. Thank you very much, Natasha, and thank you for giving me this space of time to have my say in this and to be part of the special day today. I strongly believe that what you're doing and what the other organizations are doing is a great way to help victims that coming up in the future, making awareness and perhaps making some progress towards saving lives. My name is Nour Norris. I'll tell you a little bit about me and why I'm here today. My name is Nour Norris and I'm a student at the moment in the university doing psychology and counselling. And if you look back into my life a few years ago, it was totally different. And today I'm part of this. I'm part of making the world a better place. And why do I say that? I'll tell you shortly why. Because I do believe what goes around the world comes back home, comes back to us. So the values and belief and identity people have and they bring to our society, it does affect us somehow or harm us in some ways. I lost my sister and my niece. Now in August will be 3 years, and that was looked at it as domestic abuse, or I could say as well. And if we look at it closely, we'll see there is shame and honor killing involved in that. As some of you might have heard the story, my niece decided to leave her husband, and in his belief, not in our belief, because we both come from the same religion, but we have different values and identity because we come from different nations. So our belief and our identity does not believe in a woman that get abused or harmed in any way, and she has a right. But for him, honour killing was a crucial thing to honour himself in front of his family and his community, because they don't have such a thing as a divorce or a woman leaving. So again, as society in the UK, people might look at it and see it as domestic abuse because it was like that. And that's why I do agree, base abuse is very close, or it is a domestic abuse. And I won't go through that too much because I leave it to the experts. But what I strongly believe that any woman, I won't just say woman because there's men there who get control, but anyone who's been controlled to the extent of being scared in any formula, that's an abuse. That's domestic abuse. Doesn't matter what it is. And when we have people with very strong values, that is dangerous. That raises an alarm. My niece married her husband for just under a year, and she came out of it going to heaven. And my sister was involved in that because she tried to protect her on the day, as a mother would do that. And she got killed too. Sadly, we have lost them. But after that happened, I sat with myself and I really had to think deeply of what I really wanted to do. And I realized that the world is no longer a safe place. And people's values and identity is coming across to us. And we don't really know. If it happened to us, that's why I always say, if that happened to our family, believe me, it can happen to anybody. And the reason being is because of the society is so open to the whole world. There's more travel, there's more social media, so people are more exposed to other people's life. And I'll tell you something quite personal to me, and that's something that I haven't shared before, but I will share because I do believe any experience that I have, I should share, because that will build another step to reach somewhere more safer for other people. I was involved with someone who come from a very free background, and because they were exposed into some kind of values and identity of others, their values of life has changed and they become very similar to that, and that actually raised some kind of abuse towards my life. And the reason being is because other people sometimes values does transfer into our life somehow. So it was Raneem and Khawla. There was a lot of reports to the police that she has been abused, and unfortunately signs weren't taken and clues weren't counted, and the reason being is because police forces and social workers and other organizations are not really familiar with domestic abuse, and they're not really familiar of some of the abuser's background and values. They don't really understand, and I don't expect them to understand, because if you don't know how something tastes, you wouldn't know how to explain it or see the clue about it. So it's the same thing. If you don't know someone else's life and what is abuse, how can someone be abused, what is honor means to people, you won't be able to actually pick those clues. So I would ask from my heart, from the deepest of my heart, if there's some training gets done to those people who work in a very sensitive places, who are exposed to people who've been abused, is to get some kind of training so they know what honor is, what does it mean to people, what does it mean to men, what does it mean to a lot of men, because we always see that coming from men mainly. Obviously some women, they can be like that and they don't help the situations, but majority of the time when we see an abuser who has a coercive control, you might find that because of their honor, they're trying to protect their honor, because to them honor is more valuable than the loved one's life. That is even more valuable than their own life. So they are willing to take who they love daily as life just to honor themselves, or sometimes they take their own life because they don't want to. They don't want to be shamed, named and shamed with their community or amongst anyone. I just want to highlight something that honor killing or any kind of honor, it does not always have to come from a religion background. It's usually more of a culture thing, but unfortunately people would actually use a religion to back up their belief and values. So we have to really look very closely into people who hold so much values or some kind of formula of identity. Now, people come sometimes to UK with a lot of identity. The good news is identity can be changed, and can be changed quite dramatically with more understanding, with more looking at things, and it's not really fixed, but it can get developed and be more shaped according to their values. So we don't want people to change their values, but we want them to reshape it to something a bit more better, so they don't abuse the women, they don't feel they have this honor and they have to protect. My sister, the minute that my niece got involved with this guy, she knew his background and she was worried and concerned about that. Obviously, my niece was very young and vulnerable. She did not understand that at all, even if we tried to speak to her. Again, so young women, young people need to understand maybe some things maybe could be installed in education about control, coercive control, about abuse, about honor. So that could help people, especially young women, to walk out of situations when they see the alarming started to happen. So the more she got into this relationship, the worse got. And he's basically, he said to her on the day of when they got married, and she told us that later, that he whispered in her ear that you are now my wife and there's no going back. So the day you leave me, the day I kill you. And he did live for his words, and he did it. And that was true. It wasn't a lie, it wasn't a joke, it wasn't a love signal like some people would think. Because a lot of girls, they mistaken that as a love, but it's not love, it's control. It's dangerous. Now there is some training I have been involved in, and I'm so honored to have. So is the clue that it's called 8 stages, coercive control clues. So and a pattern like that can be shown very easily to the society and to the police forces to pick up those clues when they get called out. Victims usually quite often they might call the police, but they won't take it any further. And as a lot of you might know, that they won't do that simply because they know what their perpetrator is capable of doing to them. And they know there is no limits on them. So we first of all, I would really like to see and notice changes within the police forces at first, because they are the first hand. They get to see their scene and they get to see the clues and they get to experience that firsthand. And if they have some kind of training in place, I would seriously think that would change people's life, or even save a lot of lives. Again, I could see in my niece's eyes sometimes that the hopelessness in her eyes. She knew just a few months before she passed away, she knew the danger that she's involved. She knew there's no way out of it. And I could see in her eyes she'd rather she'd be dead than alive, because she just can't cope with the pressure that she was under. And one day, just before, about a few weeks before she passed away, she looked at me and she said, "I'm not going to live for long." And I said to her, "Oh, please, Rani, please don't say that. Why are you saying that?" And she goes, "Auntie, you don't know what I know." Obviously, she knew back then a lot more than anyone would know. And what she knew then, everyone should know now before someone else's life is under danger. And believe me, if it happened to us, it can happen to anybody. It could happen to your daughters, could happen, God forbid, could happen to anybody really, because society is full of people who have either sick mind, or they have honor, or they have coercive control character. Now, I'm here today to raise an awareness, not just I want the police to be more aware and more trained, and not just police, but social workers and any kind of organization to be aware of what they might be facing with the victims. Sorry, I just look at the message. Okay. So the police was involved from the day one when she was abused quite badly, but she didn't take it any further, and the reason being because she was too scared that he's going to take her life away, or her family, because that's what he said. Though she had bruises and police saw that, she had a child, and they just asked her to get him to leave. And obviously with someone who has it so overpowering, there's no way for her to be able to do that. Now we do have an Article 2, which it means we have a court hearing coming up next year, and that's through we had a report done by the IOPC, and which shows there's a misduty of the police on some occasions, and there was 9 police officers involved prior to the day that they were murdered. And on the day that they were murdered as well, there was some fault. And if I look closely to the report, it's lack of training, it's lack of a system. It's not, the police really doesn't have a clue what domestic abuse is, and how to pick up the clues on someone's victim, how to follow it up, and to look at the background of the people who you're dealing with. What is their background, what their beliefs could be according to their, maybe you can't predict that, but you can have some kind of training to be able to pick that quite easily. So if they linked those calls, they would have had a pattern, and that pattern would have showed them an alarming, like Nakila said, that we should have some kind of system pattern showing the pattern of someone who's a victim. What is the pattern showing? And on the day that their life was taken away from them, they made 4 calls to the police, and the police officers failed to come out on the call because there was a lot of pressure. Again, there's lack of funding for the police. There's a lot of pressure on the calls. They couldn't come out on time, and they sent her back home on the 4th call. But on the 5th call, when they called her back to tell her that they're coming in the morning, that would have been 8 hours later, they heard her screaming, and that's when her life was taken away from her. As much as it's hard to talk about it, but I think it's more important to talk about it, because you probably will hear about the report more, the IOPC report, next year, more towards January, February, and will be more published. But I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned from that. There is a lot of mistakes, there's a lot of misunderstanding, and we want to avoid that. And charities like this, who works very hard to highlight why people do this, why they kill, why they control, they highlight it. It's very important to be highlighted, because I believe, and that's why I actually study psychology, to understand people, why they as well do certain things. And if we actually thin out the reasons, we'll find out. People will do whatever they do, there's an action reaction to something they do. Why? So I might do something, but that could be controlled by something else. So a charity like this is highlighting the real concern issues that people do have, and they are willing to have coercive control or kill, or take a girl out of the country to marry her to somebody just because of their values, just because of their beliefs, just because of their shame and their community is culture related. So if we can understand that, if we can understand those issues really well, then we can maybe, if we get called out for someone who's been abused, and if we see any of those signs, then maybe we can make a pattern, and that pattern can show us there's a green light, amber light, or red light. And I do believe strongly that is a way to forward, because as the life is developing, and there's more people coming to the country and people going out the country, and there's more social media, like I mentioned in the beginning, people are more exposed, and they meet people from other nationalities, and we just don't know how dangerous those people are. People don't have an idea. Just like a police officer get called out to someone who's been abused because of honor, because of culture. They don't understand what, for some of them, they don't understand what culture means. To them, it is, it's a free country, I do what I want, but they get called for somebody who's been heavily abused, or has a past abuse, based abuse, sorry, and they get called, they don't understand it, the same thing. So we need to educate people before you actually go on dating sites or you meet someone from different nationality. You need to understand their values and where they come from. And now majority of people are peaceful people. They don't want any harm, and they're happy to pass the message to their children. If their children take it, fine. But you will find some people will still hold their values and their culture very strongly. That does not just affect their household and their children, it will affect other people within society, like it did with my niece. My niece was very a free girl who believed exactly like in freedom and women and rights and all that. She was studying, she wants to be something very good and important, and she wanted to keep her bit into society. Her back home was the same. We come from Damascus, Syria, we were very open. But she met a person who had totally different values, totally different understanding, who had a coercive control, and his coercive control came mainly because of his honor in his society, with his friends or his family. And the last thing I would say is because of his belief, because any belief, any religion does not hold that. But we're human, we create that to empower our control, so that people will use some kind of either religion or some kind of state or something to control somebody. And that's a very powerful way to control, because you can't, it's very difficult to control someone by just demanding. But when you shape it and wrap it up with either a religion, and that has got nothing to do with it really, but some people are quite clever with it, then they control the victim very well. I didn't meet her. She emailed me, through Facebook, but I spoke to her. She would not reveal her identity. The girl was 21, she's in uni. Her dad controlled her so badly that he forced her to marry someone. It didn't go very well. She left, and now she's in a state where she's ready to take her life, because she said, if I run away from home and I'm very depressed and I'm happy, my dad will have it really heavy-handed with the society, his own society and his own culture. So I rather die, take my own life, than doing that to him. And who says the majority of people who come from a cultural background, strong cultural background, don't take their life away because of feeling the same. There's a lot of people who take their life just so they like we saw this young lady who the most beautiful, she had the most beautiful smile, that's very sad smile, because she knew what's coming up in her life. She can sense it. You know, she tried to take her life. She tried to take her life. That's because she was tricked. But people will take the life to honor their family, to make them feel that we're just going to walk out of this life. So we don't give you the headache. We don't put your head down in the ground in front of your society. And this problem is growing and it's spreading. It's a bit like sometimes from seeing it very close to a lot of people close to me, it can spread. Like I said, if they get controlled and shaped by some kind of powerful thing, it can be transferred to others. So people will try to control their women or their children because of a very strong belief. It becomes into values for them, so they can have a different identity, but because they've been exposed to someone else's culture, strong culture or strong belief, their values of life get changed, and that sort of reflects on within to their children or to their wife. And even if and that's happening, that's reality, that is happening, and I've had it firsthand. People do actually change, they take on a belief, they change their values, and they start to have a culture. So there's people who have a culture out of no culture, yani what it means that they didn't have such a strong culture, but because they've taken on a belief, they've joined another culture and another identity to their life, and they use that into their families or the wife or children or the loved ones. I hope I haven't gone over time. And I would just like to thank whoever has invited me. I could go on and on and on. I don't want to bore you in any way, but I do believe today is a great day to be here and to remember those people who no one remembers them, because the people who their life got taken away from them, their family don't want to remember them. And to have people sitting here and having a day every year just to remember them, that's amazing. Thank you very much for having me. And I'll be more than happy to take on any kind of speech or talk or anything, or help in any kind of formula to any organization, if that will change anything to anybody and or will save any lives. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for being courageously sharing your experience and the experiences of your niece and sister. You're a force for change and good, and you have our full support in your quest for answers. So, you know, listening to you made me think that whilst there is no criticism of the police's investigation into the deaths, it's really tragic that a higher standard of investigation can sometimes apply when it's too late. And you know, we know all too well that sadly many statutory organisations are not responding appropriately to violence against women and girls, particularly those that are from, you know, communities where they are marginalised. So you have our full support and commitment, and we stand with you in solidarity for answers.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
So I'm now going to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is our phenomenal data and case analyst, Anne Bonner. Anne is going to put the domestic context of honour-based abuse into perspective through our Helpline Insights data, and we'll also use our insight data to tell you a bit about how the pandemic has impacted the calls that we've received. You would have heard Nicole speak earlier about the Domestic Abuse Commissioner calls that we attend regularly. Anne shares her data and insights so we can project with, you know, our sector colleagues really where honour-based abuse is at and what's happening for the people that we support. So over to you, Anne. Sorry, Anne, it's just on mute. The phrase of the pandemic.
Sorry about that. So thank you, Natasha, for your introduction. And again, thank you to everyone for joining us today. So a little bit about my background. I've been working in the VOG sector now for almost 20 years. In 2002, I started supporting victims of honour-based abuse and domestic abuse in refuge, and then worked as a community outreach worker supporting victims living in Kirklees. I then became the manager of the outreach services, all at Pennine Domestic Abuse Partnership based in Kirklees. Then 2 years ago, I successfully became the data and casework analyst at Karma Nirvana. And this role gives me a very different opportunity to help improve responses to victims of honour-based abuse and domestic abuse using data and narrative recorded from the callers to our helpline. I analyse the helpline data our team collates, which supports and informs our campaigns such as ending child marriage and virginity testing. Our data has also contributed to the government's response to the impact the pandemic has had on VOG services by the DA Commissioner Office, the Home Office and the Ministry of Justice. This presentation explains how and why a statutory definition of honour-based abuse will not only have a huge positive impact on victims and survivors, but also provide a key step in the right direction for multi-agency professional practice guidelines that provide a common understanding of what constitutes honour-based abuse. I will also provide some insights about how the pandemic has impacted our helpline activity. So as part of Karma Nirvana's strategic 3-year plan, we want a statutory definition of honour-based abuse framed within the current statutory definition of domestic abuse. We would like to see guidelines that challenge existing prejudice and harmful stereotypes that label victims and damage confidence to speak out or seek help. We believe that once honour-based abuse is taken out of its cultural cul-de-sac and framed as a form of domestic abuse, the introduction of a statutory definition defines this type of behaviour beyond its driver and motivation will be another key step to improving identification, understanding and response. So how do we propose to do that? To frame the context of our aim, let us first consider the unofficial National Police Chief Council definition of honour-based abuse. An incident or crime involving threats of violence, intimidation, coercion or abuse, including psychological, physical, sexual, financial or emotional abuse, which has or may have been committed to protect or defend the honour of an individual, family and or community for alleged or perceived breaches of the family and or community's code of behaviour. It's a good start. It sets out the types of honour-based abuse that includes physical, emotional, financial, sexual. It sets out the motivation and driver of honour-based abuse, breaches of family honour and codes of behaviour. But it doesn't go far enough to include the patterns of multiple crimes that victims of honour-based abuse experience. Honour-based abuse is very rarely made up of one incident or one crime. Neither does it state who the perpetrators are. However, the most recent definition of domestic abuse introduced in the Domestic Abuse Bill goes somewhere to capturing what is missing. Any incident or pattern of incidents of controlling, coercive, threatening behaviour, violence or abuse between those aged 16 or over who are or have been intimate partners, family members, regardless of gender or sexuality. The abuse can encompass but is not limited to psychological, physical, sexual, financial and emotional. This definition recognises patterns of behaviour. It recognises that there are a number of incidents rather than one crime or one incident. The definition clearly states who perpetrators are: husbands and wives, girlfriends and boyfriends, ex-partners, relatives, brothers and sisters, aunties and uncles. So how can we connect Karma Nirvana's data to the statutory definition of domestic abuse and evidence why framing honour-based abuse as domestic abuse is a huge step forward? Karma Nirvana data shows that last year, 98% of new callers to the National Honour Based Abuse Helpline fell within the statutory definition of domestic abuse due to the personal connection with their perpetrators. That's 2,134 new callers to the helpline who either were married or in a civil partnership to their perpetrator, engaged to their perpetrator, in an intimate personal relationship with their perpetrator, in a parental relationship with someone, with the same child of their perpetrator, or their relatives were their perpetrators. The victim's partner was cited more than any other perpetrator last year, that was 29%. Mum and dad were the second most cited perpetrators, collectively at 25%, and the victim's family was the third most cited perpetrator at 19%. We can now start to understand why victims of honour-based abuse are less likely to reach out because of who is perpetrating the abuse. Victims of honour-based abuse are more likely to be subjected to abuse at the hands of multiple perpetrators, which creates a huge barrier to speaking out. 1,500 new callers to the helpline last year, that's 64% of new callers cited more than one perpetrator. That's 1,500 victims who have to consider reporting their parents, their siblings and their in-laws and face being disowned or at worst killed if they speak out. Where victims have multiple perpetrators, framing honour-based abuse and domestic abuse encourages victims to identify that what they are experiencing is domestic abuse and have more confidence to speak out. So yes, we can confidently suggest with our data that victims of honour-based abuse are also victims of domestic abuse. So how will framing honour-based abuse within the domestic abuse help victims? It will help identify and support victims whose perpetrators are mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers, in-laws and grandparents. For those in contact with victims of honour-based abuse, they will have a better understanding of how to provide effective support. The police, social care, education and health will have established guidelines and policies to follow, improving confidence to call out honour-based abuse. Victims will know that what they are experiencing is domestic abuse and that there is support from professionals that have clear established guidelines to follow to protect them, which will result in improved confidence to report honour-based abuse. From a data perspective, the benefits of having a statutory definition will be shown by increased reporting and increased self-identification. And we will be tracking the data via a national honour-based abuse data set that we are currently working towards developing. And we welcome collaboration with anybody here today who wants to contribute to the work that we're doing. So please make contact with me by email, which has been provided in the Q&A, or you can visit our newly launched website where you can also make contact. So the second part of my presentation is an overview of how the pandemic has impacted victims of honour-based abuse who call our helpline. So I'm sure all our delegates here will know the last 15 months have been really tough. Tough on the sector, tough on staff, and tough on the victims that rely on the services we provide. As we started to come out of lockdown earlier this year, we had time to reflect on the helpline trends throughout the pandemic. Some of the most significant impacts we experienced were as international travel restrictions were implemented, new referrals for victims facing the threat of forced marriage overseas fell by 45%. Social distancing meant that new referrals for victims facing the threat of forced marriage in the UK fell by 76%. Following the heavily publicised increases in domestic abuse at the start of the pandemic, new referrals for victims identifying themselves that they were experiencing domestic abuse increased by 63%. And as education effectively closed, new referrals from schools and colleges fell by 30% and 57% respectively. So what have we learned and how can we move forward? Victims of honour-based abuse and forced marriage experienced increasing levels of abuse throughout the pandemic. Victims who wanted to flee abuse were faced with barriers to accessing safe accommodation. Travel restrictions meant that victims being taken abroad and forced into marriage fell. And working from home guidelines pulled VOG agencies off the front line. And what can we do? We can keep raising awareness of honour-based abuse and forced marriage within local communities, keep pushing honour-based abuse high on the sector's agenda, and increase access to virtual spaces for victims to reach out for support. One more key point here is that although cases of forced marriage fell during the pandemic, that doesn't mean that they will not go ahead. We have already started to see an increase in victims calling the helpline because they are facing the threat of forced marriage. Over the last 2 weeks, we have experienced a 67% increase compared with the same period last year, suggesting that victims are now coming forward as restrictions have been lifted. So if anyone does want to get in touch with me to discuss our data or contributing to developing the National Honour-Based Abuse Dataset, again, my email address has been dropped in the chat, so please do get in touch. And again, please do visit our newly launched website. Thank you.
Thank you so much for setting the context of honour-based abuse, or honour-based domestic abuse, in fact, and enabling us to understand that the majority of calls to the National Helpline fit within the statutory definition, as we've already heard from Nicole earlier on. Whilst the government do acknowledge that honour-based abuse is a form of domestic abuse, the connection between the two is rarely made on the ground by both victims and professionals, and we're really committed to defining this narrative to help both victims and professionals alike to recognise the connection, which, as you've heard Anne say, we believe will empower and promote self-identification and improve confidence in responses. So we're going to now move on with the agenda. We're going to share the latest in our updates on our live campaign, starting with our campaign to end child marriage. So a decade ago, I can't quite believe it's been that long, but Karma Nirvana became the first member organisation in the UK to join Girls Not Brides. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with Girls Not Brides, they're a global coalition of organisations working to one common goal, and that is to eradicate child marriage. A few years after becoming members, we formed a partnership with 3 other UK NGOs, and collectively we're working together as a team towards our shared goal. So what is the campaign seeking to do? Well, there are 2 clear outcomes. The first campaign objective is we want to remove all exceptions to marriage under the age of 18. Now, in England and Wales, we know that children are still able to marry with parental consent. In our experience on the helpline, parental consent is synonymous with parental coercion, and we don't want to have any law which facilitates child marriage to happen, which is why we're asking for any exception under the age of 18 to be removed. And the second ask is that we want to protect all children from all child marriages. This includes the ones that are registered at 16 and 17, but it also includes those that are not registered, those that might be religious or cultural, and these can take place at any time. Unfortunately, our law requires a child to raise the alarm of their own child marriage and to state that they are being forced to marry to receive protection. And we know that many children do not recognise their experiences as being forced to marry. So it's quite a real sad state of affairs that the forced marriage law doesn't recognise age as a standalone factor. The fact that you are a child is automatically a forced marriage. That's not actually the case. A child would still need to evidence that they have experienced duress or coercion. And what we want to do is for the law to leave no doubt, for it to be really clear on its position on child marriage, to make it a crime, and ensuring that those that are married in religious or cultural marriages are adequately safeguarded and protected. So these are our asks, and it's been a real roller coaster of a journey to get to where we are today. You may have been following in the news, but there's been some huge developments in the campaign. We wrote to the Prime Minister in May of this year and received a really encouraging response from Lord Wolfson at the MOJ to say that the government were committed to removing the exceptions to marry under the age of 18, so parental consent. But as I've just alluded to, that isn't going to protect all children from child marriage. It will only protect those in registered marriages at 16 and 17. So you're going to hear from our next speakers as to why it's so vitally important that the law goes a step further by actually making it a crime too. So I'm really proud to introduce our next speaker, our phenomenal ambassador, Farhana. Farhana is simply incredible. She's living proof that there is life after such experiences, and we're really proud that she's using her experiences as a force for good and to make change. So I'm now going to hand over to our incredible Farhana.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Natasha, for having me and for that introduction. I'm going to speak a little bit about my own experience and then why I've joined Karma Nirvana as an ambassador to campaign for the change in child marriage. I grew up in and was born in the UK and had a very happy childhood, born to two first-generation immigrant parents in the UK and was well integrated into British society. At the age of my teen years, I started to fall in with the wrong crowd at school, and my kind of academic achievements suffered, and my school were rightly concerned. They raised a flag to my parents, who were mortified that this obedient and very well-behaved child was suddenly falling off the rails, and I don't think they knew how to contain that. As a result, so my older sister had gone off to university, single, to study medicine, and my brother was also at university and eventually became a secondary school teacher. So, you know, a highly academic and ambitious family. But because I posed a challenge with my defiance, one of the avenues open to me was child marriage as a way of containing my rebelliousness, I think. So at the age of 16, just as I finished my GCSEs, my mum told me that she wanted to go to Bangladesh because her mother was very unwell, and she and with that sounded absolutely fine. So myself and my younger sister went to Bangladesh, and amongst the jubilation of a long overdue family reunion, we hadn't been to Bangladesh in many years. I hadn't quite registered the fact that my grandmother was in fact healthy and well, and we absorbed the culture and were welcomed by our family there. A few days into that trip, somebody had told me that there were whisperings of a boy coming to see me in order to propose marriage. And at that stage, I realized that that was what was going to be put to me, that I would be essentially asked to commit to a child marriage. I spoke to my mother and I made very clear that I wasn't ready. It wasn't something that I wanted to do. And at that point, the coercion and intimidation began. She told me that if I had told anyone or if I declined, they would kill me, or no good would happen. And as a result, I tried to get myself out of that situation by essentially being compliant and saying I was ready, but perhaps I could go back to the UK, finish my A-levels, and then come back after doing that. And I thought that had settled the matter, as did everybody else, I thought. Then later that evening, I'd heard that the boy's family had come to see me anyway, and I was ushered into a room by myself with individuals that I didn't recognize, and they began reading from a document in formal dialect in Bengali, which I wasn't familiar with necessarily. There were parts that I could pick up, but I wasn't necessarily following. And they paused for a moment and asked me to say a word, which confusingly I obliged and repeated. And there was gasps around the room because they then left abruptly and I didn't really know what happened. And my cousin sister said to me, "Gosh, you weren't even shy. You just obliged." And I said, I don't quite know what you mean. She said, "Oh." And then I saw the look of horror on her face because she realized that I didn't know I was married. and that I just committed to my marriage to a man that I had barely met. And what I want to, that was the beginning of, a numbing few days where, the wedding was celebrated. There was lots of joyous celebration around me, and I had gone completely numb knowing that I was now married and to be sent off to a home with a man that I didn't recognize. But that really was the beginning of the horror. After my wedding day, on my wedding night, my husband had decided he would impart upon me all of his own truths, which included him essentially being a horrendous, violent sexual predator, who I was now in the clasps of. And despite me saying, I don't think I'm ready to consummate our marriage, I am only 16, perhaps we can get to know each other and then we can take it as it was, again, thinking that I was pacifying the situation and being compliant. He agreed, but in later that night was the first night that he raped me, and then it carried on throughout, I think, and I thought the next day I would go home and I would tell my mother what had happened, and it had been a horrible mistake, and I knew that I had been defiant, but actually, she hadn't intended to have me married to this awful human being who perhaps wanted to contain my rebelliousness and put me on a path that was aligned to what she wanted for my future, but she hadn't intended to punish me in this way. And to my horror, I think it dawned on me that she did. And actually it wasn't about it wasn't about retaining her honor. It was about essentially sending a message that was punitive to prevent her being tested again. And really it was to show me that I didn't get away with it and that I wouldn't, and this would be my future. And so she sent me home back with him. And so I submitted myself to that, thinking again that I had a return ticket booked at the end of the summer holidays, and I would be back in the UK and I would escape my situation then. As the end of August came about, I realised that no one was making any motions of me returning back to the UK. I didn't have my passport or my ticket. And I was told at that point that I wasn't allowed to return to the UK, that I needed to stay there until I was less of a threat, a flight risk, in the very literal sense. So I stayed in the UK, and my sister and my mum returned. And then I realised that my passport was due to expire at the end of September, and there was still no sign of me coming back. And at that point, I felt very, very trapped. I was, being abused every day. I didn't have anybody that I could communicate with or any access to the outer world, let alone anybody that I knew and trusted. And what's strange to say is that in Bangladesh at that time, child marriage was actually illegal. And there was a question as to whether my marriage should be allowed at that time. They spoke amongst themselves, and they came to the conclusion, because I was a British citizen and it was legal in the UK, that there wouldn't be any repercussions if the Bangladeshi authorities allowed my marriage to go ahead. And so the Bangladeshi authorities were happy for my marriage to go ahead because my nation's laws failed to protect me. And as my passport expired, I then started to panic and thought, I do want to return to the UK. And I approached my mum on the phone and I said, I really want to come back to the UK. I'm missing my A-levels. I want to come back. She said, well, I'm still not convinced that, you are on the straight and narrow. You're not going to be allowed to come back to the UK until you're pregnant. And it was such a strange thing because we were from a family that was quite modest and conservative. The thought of talking about sexual relations and pregnancy was so odd to me that even to hear those words come from my mother, Kate, was horrific. But I submitted myself to that. It wasn't difficult, having daily marital rape. The incidence of pregnancy wasn't, long in coming, and I became pregnant, and I thought that would be it. So I phoned my mom happily to say that I was pregnant and I could come home, and it didn't end. She then said that I wasn't allowed to come back until I was pregnant beyond the date of abortion. And so I eventually came back to the UK after going to the British High Commission in Dhaka to say that my passport had expired. So I'd had contact with British authorities at that stage who knew I was a heavily pregnant 16-year-old without a return plane ticket, with a passport expired. And it wasn't questioned. And the reason why it wasn't questioned is because it was perfectly legal for me to be married at 16. So I came back heavily married to the UK. Lived in my mother's home, so my own family home, and what happens with child marriage is not only the incidence of child marriage. It's not just a fleeting chance that you'll suffer domestic abuse. It's part of that structure of ball and chain. It opens you out to, having poorer life outcomes by design, because by having poorer life outcomes, you are reliant on those people that put you in that situation. I had to live in my parents' home because I couldn't afford to be anywhere else and look after my son. I brought my husband to the UK after applying for a visa, and essentially that domestic abuse was enabled and facilitated in my home. I, however, did try and overcome that. So I spent years essentially re-enrolling into the very things that I was being restricted from. So I made an effort to rejoin college, and I used that as my focus. I did very, very well in my A levels, and as a result got a place at a university that opened up amazing prospects for me. And after that got into a graduate scheme. So I was able to overcome the challenges and financial hardship eventually, but throughout that period was entirely reliant on my mother, who put me in that situation, and a husband that abused me and was enabled to do so by my mother. I didn't recognize that I was a victim of child marriage until many, many years later, after I finished, escaping from my situation. I had escaped through a chain of escalating domestic violence, and it escalated to a point where the police were called, and they said to me, actually, Farhana, if you call us again, we will just arrest him. He will just go to prison, and that will be it. And I said, please don't do that. I can't deal with the shame that it would put on my parents if I had divorced and put my husband into prison. And it was ironic that I was thinking of the same, even at that stage, as to the consequences of the genuine atrocities that I was suffering. I still felt guilty. I still felt like I had to protect those people that were doing these horrible things to me. And when it did escalate, I threatened him. I said, I will call the police. You will get taken away. And they had actually made it very clear to him that they weren't going to take my testimony into account. They were just going to arrest him and I think that put genuine fear into him, and he left. He left at that point and he filed for divorce. So I didn't escape heroically. I didn't get myself out of that situation. He left because he knew he was in danger if he continued. And that was quite a wake-up call for me, because I realized at that point he was still in control of my life, and I was still living in my parents' home. And I took that opportunity then to move away from all of that supportive infrastructure of being able to work full-time and having a roof over my head and having clothes on, my son, and being fed and cared for and loved. And so it came with these mixed emotions of gratitude and guilt, and yet, real sense of betrayal from my own family, I think. So I then read in an article, I think, after I'd left and after I had, overcome all of those challenges in my past, and no one having ever known anything about my past before, and me being reluctant to ever point to it as an excuse of not having succeeded, and instead using it as a motivation and a tool for giving me drive and ambition to succeed and change the outcomes for my child and make sure that he didn't have that growing up. And I read an article in the paper, and I realized in that article where it had mentioned in an overview what forced child marriages were. And at that point, the horror and reality hit me that far from my own situation being as a result of a unique set of tragic circumstances, it bore all the hallmarks of child marriages that were happening way before me and continue to happen to this day. And so I reached out to Karma Nirvana at that point to join them in and see how I could help. And I expected that first visit to come amongst a group of people that were like-minded, who I can relate to, and who, lives resonated with mine. And actually, that wasn't the case. I couldn't relate to anybody there. They weren't like me, and that was the point. The point was we were completely different people, and our experiences and what happened to us was common things in our lives, but we are not the homogeneous race of individuals who are all at risk of being forced into child marriage. And that was evident in my family itself. My sister didn't have a forced child marriage, my brother didn't, my younger sister didn't. But it's a tool that's open to parents of our community who know that that is an effective way of addressing things that they may find challenging, and rather than deal with that in an open and mature way, this was an avenue that was being used. I struggled to call myself a survivor ambassador, which is the title we're given at Karma Nirvana, until last year when I heard about Shafilia's story and how her passing came about. And I realized how much of that resonated with my own experiences at the time that I was 16, and the fact that she didn't make it, and Banaz didn't make it, and I had survived. And now I am proud to call myself a survivor ambassador and to campaign for the end of child marriage. Because for me, when I hear the judge's remarks at the end of that trial, and I remember following that story so closely at the time and being conflicted, recognizing that there was another victim like me, but also wondering whether I had it in me, even at that point, to essentially pursue an action that would result in my mother going to prison. And I couldn't make it, and that onus shouldn't be on a child to make. And the change in child marriage in the UK, or England and Wales in particular, not only allows child marriage to happen, it enables it with this loophole for parental consent. And my hope is that by making it illegal to, removing the exception for child consent, we're essentially taking away one layer that facilitates the coercion of child marriage. But also by making child law a criminal act, we're taking away that ambiguity of prosecution. It's not up to me to report my parents. If it's plainly illegal and they go away and do it, then it is for them to be prosecuted because they have committed child abuse. It is a crime. And I don't have to have that guilt on me. They suffer the consequences of their actions, and they do so knowingly. So I think it's really, really important, and to have that. I think everyone in the UK that has heard about the campaign since is always shocked to hear that child marriage isn't illegal. They do see it as something that happens in foreign countries like Bangladesh, and I know for a fact because it didn't happen in Bangladesh. All of my cousins were educated and in their 30s, and in fact they were seen as the jewel of the crown in their families, and no man was good enough for their daughter. And here was I, as a UK citizen, being married in Bangladesh. And subsequently, after my marriage, my ex-husband had returned to the UK to marry yet another child, and it was not allowed to happen because the girl was 17, and the authorities stepped in and stopped it from happening. Now, subsequently to that, Bangladesh has now lowered the age of child marriage in Bangladesh and pointed to the UK and said, well, you can't navel gaze at us because you allow child marriage to happen in the UK, and there are customs in our country that we're happy to, commit to and lower the age here. And so it's really important that not only do we change the law in the UK, it really increases our campaigning power across the globe. I've overcome my own situation, and it's made me stronger, but I would have been strong anyway, and I didn't need to suffer that way, and nor does any child. And as we approach the summer holidays now, every year I have this feeling of the number of 16-year-old girls that suddenly fall out of the education system, don't have anyone expecting them to return, who fall into this vacuum and are, you know, never to be seen again. And by changing the law on child marriage, I hope that we may not eradicate it, but we certainly will take away the vast majority of cases of parents who do so with impunity. My mother never, ever would have broken the law in the UK to punish me. She had her boundaries, and many of these parents do. This was something that was open to her, and she took it. Had it been taken away, she wouldn't have, and it's as simple as that. So I leave you with that as a broad overview as to my own background and why I'm campaigning to end child marriage in the UK. And I'm really grateful to Karma Nirvana's support in the background for campaigning for many, many years to change this. I will tell you that I was so heartened when Pauline Latham put in her bill for first reading in November, and I thought we had cracked it. And then I was absolutely shattered when the second reading was cancelled, and I thought, here we go again, 20 years on, and this will never change. Thanks to Sajid Javad's happily, you know, media circus, we managed to get it into the profile of the UK, and I'm very grateful for that. But I'm eternally grateful to Pauline Latham for all of her campaigning behind the scenes, and Natasha for continually drumming awareness of it and bringing it to the fore. It's not a niche area. It captures and impacts people of all different backgrounds and people with many different futures who can change the world.
Thank you, Farhana, so much for that. You're just incredible. Thank you for sharing so bravely and courageously your experiences, and your experience speak to the heart as to why this campaign is so vitally needed. And there was something that you said you're relying on the people that put you in this situation, which again goes to the heart as to why the state needs to take action and take that onus away from the children. So thank you so much. And like you, absolutely, you know, eternally grateful to our next speaker, Pauline Latham, who we're absolutely proud to not only call a colleague, but a friend who's been championing these issues with us for a very long time. And, you know, she's taken the parliamentary leadership on this campaign. It's been incredible to work with her. So I'm not going to delay any further. I'm going to now introduce our next speaker, Pauline Latham.
Thank you very much, Natasha. And I'd like to say thank you for inviting me to this, because I've watched the progress of Karma Nirvana over many years, having met Jasvinder when I was Mayor of Derby, actually, in 2007-8 at an International Women's Day. And I was so impressed with her story, which was a forced marriage at 16, I believe, and subsequently read her books. And I think then it sort of lodged in the back of my mind that this obviously was not right. So I came to Parliament in 2010, and I have sat on the International Development Committee for many years, well, ever since then. And I've seen in other countries where we are telling other countries that they should raise the age of marriage to 18. And as Farhana so bravely said just now, I mean, she was incredible. And everybody should hear that story, because nobody would be against what we're trying to do. But we were told by Bangladesh that actually you allow child marriage, so why should we raise the age of marriage? And we've signed conventions, international conventions, to say we won't have child marriage, but we do. And so this is why I got involved, significantly involved, about 4 years ago. And then decided, working with the different charities, including Karma Nirvana and others, that I would champion this in Parliament. And I was rebuffed by many ministers who I spoke to and said, could we do this? Could we change it? And they said, no, we've no plans to do that. And I didn't realise the system that you had to go through in Parliament to get something through. So I first introduced it as a private member's bill in 2018, but I couldn't get it. I got the first stage through, but I couldn't get it further than that, simply because I knew that there was a member of parliament who was going to shout object, which meant I wouldn't get to the next stage. So I withdrew it at that point, and then when we went for the dissolution of parliament before the 2019 general election, of course it fell completely. Meanwhile, I talked to quite a few people and understood the system better. And then after the 2019 election in 2020, in October, I reintroduced this bill into the House, a private member's bill, but then COVID struck and we stopped having any private members' bills readings, and they're only on a Friday, so they were all stopped, which meant I was scuppered again. So then we've had the Queen's speech recently and it was dropped. But meanwhile, I'd been to speak to the Prime Minister and was shocked to find that he didn't realise people could get married at the age of 16 with parental consent. I don't suppose it had ever crossed his mind. But anyway, he thought it was pretty shocking and agreed that he should support it. So I left it with him and he talked to lots of people, and then I was chatted to many people who in Parliament who did support it. There've been a couple of people who don't want to support it, but they've got they don't understand what it's about. They don't understand that really it is coercion. And I'm not trying to stop people who go to school together, who fall in love, to get married, because they can wait till they're 18. That is the legal age of marriage. We're not raising the age of marriage, it's the legal age of marriage. So I'm determined to get this through. And then, as we've heard, Sajid Javid, it's all a very complicated system in Parliament. We have private members' bills, which is the way I've tried to do it, but then we have these bills that we can put in a ballot for. And if you're lucky, you get on the ballot. And I have never got on the ballot paper, but Sajid came out number 5, and he rang me to say that he was going to do the marriage bill, to which I was very pleased that it was at last going to get through, because it was going to have government support. Private members' bills do not get through, 10-minute rule bills do not get through without government support, neither do private members' bills. So we now have government support, and I've met with Victoria Atkins, who's going to talk to you in a minute. I've met with Lord Wolfson in the House of Lords, and who is completely behind it, but he couldn't commit to support it until he'd been given the nod by somebody higher up. Obviously, I've talked to Victoria, and I've spoken to Robert Buckland, who again is in favour of it, and we've just got to have some discussions now about how we're going to do it. So we've got it on the government's agenda. So I hope, I can't see any reason why it won't go through. But there are some people who think people should be allowed to get married at 16 and 17. It's their civil liberties that are being inhibited. Well, it's not. It's preventing children from being abused. And I believe very passionately that we need to stop this. And I said before to Natasha that if this is the only thing I do whilst I'm in Parliament, I would do it, because I would do anything to get this through at this stage. It just seems crazy that children who, we've heard from Farhana, who said she couldn't fight all of this. She thought she wasn't ready for marriage. She couldn't fight it, and nobody queries it because it's legal. That's what we've got to stop. And as I say, I'm not wanting to stop people in love getting married, because 18 in the scheme of things is not very long to wait. And then at 18, if you're being coerced, you have got much more, so much more power to be able to say no to your parents. At 16, you don't. You're a child and you're reliant on them. But at 18, you're hoping to go to university or into training or whatever. You can stand on your own 2 feet far, far better, and you can say no. But it's very, very difficult for young people, children, to get married at that age, because they are, in my view, it is child abuse, and we have to protect these people. So I'm now working hard with other people in Parliament to get their support. I've got a lot of support, cross-party support, and that's really important that we have cross-party support. It's not a political issue. Well, it certainly shouldn't be a political issue. It should be about doing the right thing for young people. So that's what I'm planning to do. Karma Nirvana have been incredibly supportive. I've met some amazing people who have gone through this, and you know, if anybody ever hears their story, they will always be persuaded. So Karma Nirvana, you've done an amazing job in raising this, and I hope that I'm going to be able to do that last bit of the amazing job and get it into law so that we can stop these young people who have a future ahead of them in education and training, and to have an economic career, because if you stop your education, you cannot get back easily. And so it's really tough for these young people who miss out on education and training to have any sort of economic impact, whereas this will give them that opportunity, which I think is vitally important.
Thank you, Pauline, for that, and thank you, Farhana. You're both absolutely exceptional women, and it's such a joy to work with you both on this vital campaign. On our website, we've got a guide for people in our audience as to how they can support the campaign, and we'd encourage each and every one of you to either tweet your MP or go a step further and write to your MP. We've got a fantastic template letter available on our website that's been drafted by Farhana, so please go and access that and write to your MP. It's so important that we spread the word as to why it's so vitally important to support our ask and to get behind Pauline's bill. So thank you to you both. We've got a slight change in the agenda. Before we go on to talk about the virginity testing campaign, we're going to invite our next keynote speaker. The Minister has to leave by 12, so we're going to invite her to come and speak first. So our next speaker is the Minister for Safeguarding, Victoria Atkins, and we're hugely grateful to Victoria for all of her support over the years in our work to tackle honour-based abuse. Victoria has always taken the time to meet with us in person. In fact, we met on Monday this week, and you know, it's been great to have that contact even throughout the pandemic. And what that's reinforced to us is that the Minister's always been committed to listen to our concerns and to address them in any way that she can help. So without further delay, I'm going to invite our next speaker, the Minister for Safeguarding, Victoria Atkins.
Thank you so much, Natasha, and it's a real pleasure to be joining you today. And today it's such an important event. We've marked this Day of Memory, of course, previously. I know this year, rather like last year, we're having to do it online, but I think it's a really important moment in our calendar, and it gives me the ability, apart from joining you all in your memories, it also enables me to thank Karma Nirvana and Natasha and others for all their work in this incredibly important area. And I know that the Day of Memory was created to honour Shafilia Ahmed, who was murdered in 2003, and that horrifying case rightly brought this issue under the spotlight. And since then, sadly, there have been so many other victims. And so today is a moment for us to remember them and to pay our respects to them and to celebrate their lives. We must send a clear and unequivocal message that there is no honour in murder, there is no honour in violence, and there is no honour in forcing someone into marriage. So I'd like to pay tribute to the survivors, friends and family members who have shared and will continue to share their stories today. I can only imagine how difficult it is for you to speak about such difficult personal and traumatic experiences, and you have my admiration and my respect for being able to do that today. It is incredibly moving and upsetting to be reminded of the appalling consequences of these crimes, and so I do pay tribute, as I say, to Karma Nirvana, Natasha, Anup and all of the team for the work that they do on this day in, day out. There is no place for so-called honour-based abuse in our society, and the government is taking action to crack down on this terrible form of offending. As part of our ongoing work to prevent violence against women and girls, we have significantly strengthened the law by making forced marriage a specific offence and by introducing lifelong anonymity for victims. We also made it a crime to breach a forced marriage or a protection order, and close to 3,000 of these orders have been issued since their introduction. Of course, prevention is always the best approach, and these orders and their FGM equivalents remained a top priority for the family courts throughout lockdown periods. But legislation alone cannot achieve all the change that we want to see, and the government's work goes beyond it. Our border force staff work with a range of partners to raise awareness of harmful practices, above all through the Operation Limelight programme at the border. In another important development last year, for the first time, we published the number of so-called honour-based abuse cases encountered by police forces. We also provided funding to the police to put in place a new system to ensure that they are informed about new forced marriage and FGM protection orders as soon as they are issued. And our dedicated forced marriage unit provides support and advice for victims, those at risk and professionals through its public helpline. The unit also works to spread knowledge and understanding of forced marriage across the country. For example, last year it started a new training programme for social workers to complement its existing programme for the police. Last year, the unit delivered information to more than 450 professionals, in addition to the thousands who took part in the e-learning course, which we provide on forced marriage. I'm very much aware that the steps we have had to take to safeguard public health over the last 16 months have placed some victims in an even more vulnerable situation. And both the Forced Marriage Unit and Karma Nirvana's helpline have witnessed a fall in calls about forced marriage since the pandemic started. With restrictions on travel and weddings, that perhaps was to be expected, but that does not mean that the coercive behaviour surrounding forced marriage and other forms of so-called honour-based abuse have decreased to, indeed far from it. We will no doubt hear today that the helpline run by Karma Nirvana has seen a rise in calls overall, and I'm really pleased that we have been able to provide the helpline with additional funding to enable further support for victims during this very difficult time and to make people aware of their services and the help available. Additionally, we ran a public communications campaign throughout lockdown called #YouAreNotAlone, and that has signposted the support available throughout the pandemic and the organisations supporting victims of so-called honour-based abuse were included in the support services to which we guided victims. But of course, there is more to do. And as the public would expect, we very much continue to consider what further action is needed to protect the most vulnerable in our society and to bring perpetrators to justice. Work to tackle so-called honour-based abuse will be a key part of our upcoming Tackling Violence Against Women and Girls strategy. Many of you on the call will know that the public call for evidence received more than 180,000 responses from members of the public, a really, really extraordinary number for a government consultation. And we are determined to respond meaningfully to the issues raised in those responses. I'm really, really grateful to everyone who responded, and I know many are on this call today, and we really have carefully considered each and every contribution. That feedback has been absolutely invaluable in helping shape the strategy, which will be published soon. We've also made clear that the strategy will include plans to raise the legal age of marriage to 18 in England and Wales. It was great to hear some of Pauline's speech just then, and she's been such an amazing campaigner on this issue. I know that this is a change that many of you have campaigned for tirelessly, and so I thank you for that work. And as I say, the government is very, very much committed to working with you. The change will mean that children aged 16 and 17-year-olds will no longer be able to marry with the consent of their parents, and so this means that young people will be able to make their own decisions about life partners when they are at an age where they're able to do so. And this will, of course, bring us into line with many of our global partners. The new strategy will also set out the findings of the review which the Department of Health and Social Care has been undertaking on the practices of virginity testing and hymenoplasty. And I know that our brilliant advisor on VORG issues, Nimco Ali, has already or is going to speak to this conference about these matters today. We are very much determined to work with you to take all necessary action to ensure that vulnerable women and girls are protected from these terrible practices. So we are very, very much determined to tackle so-called honour-based abuse. Again, enormous thanks to Karma Nirvana and all of today's speakers and contributors for the work that they do to raise awareness of so-called honour-based abuse. And the government is with you in terms of trying to tackle these crimes. We've got to make sure that those young women, those girls who have lost their lives to this dreadful form of offending are never forgotten, and we owe it to them to do everything that we can to prevent further tragedies. So I'm wishing you a great deal of luck today and hope that you find today useful, but also we're very, very mindful of the reasons for today's Day of Memory and respecting the memories of those we have lost. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister, for sharing that, and I'm delighted to hear the exclusion of the removal of parental consent will be in the strategy, and also the findings from the Department of Health and Social Care's review into virginity testing. And I think it goes to show that when organisations like ours work collectively with others, we are able to make these changes with government support. So a huge thank you to you. So we're going to move on now back to the agenda, talking about the campaigns. Before we do get onto that though, I just want to take a moment for us to remember a young 16-year-old girl called Heshu, which you will see on the PowerPoint that we have now. This is connected to our virginity testing campaign. Now, Heshu attended William Morris Academy in Fulham when she began a relationship with a boy from school. She described living a double life, wearing makeup only after leaving the house and asking friends to lie so that she could see her boyfriend in secret. During the summer before Heshu's death, the Yonus family returned to Iraqi Kurdistan for a holiday. Heshu had worried that her father would pressure her to marry or prevent her from returning to the UK, so she left her passport details with a friend and recorded a video diary while she was there. On her return, she told friends that her father had forced her to have a virginity test, which she allegedly failed, making her unmarriable within the community. She reported to friends that her father had held a gun to her head because of this. 2 days before she was murdered, her father had received an anonymous letter from the community calling her a slut and a prostitute and saying that they were aware that she had a boyfriend. 2 days after receiving this letter, Heshu's father attacked his daughter, who ran to the bathroom to barricade herself in, and he broke into the bathroom and stabbed her to death. Now, the murder of Heshu was actually the first in the UK to be recognised by police as an honour killing. Now, this was back in 2002. I'm sad to report that in this particular case, the trial judge considered the father's explanation of being torn between two cultures as a mitigating factor in his sentence, so it actually reduced his custodial sentence. Many people are aware of Heshu's story, but they're not aware that as part of her lived experiences, she was subjected to a virginity test. Virginity is, as a concept, both harmful and problematic. It's deeply embedded as a social norm and actually has no scientific basis whatsoever. We at Karma Nirvana recognise that virginity testing and hymenoplasty are forms of violence against women and girls. So we're pleased to see that this is included, as the Minister has said, in the next Borg strategy, because it is in itself both a cause and a consequence of gender inequality. In our written submission to the call for evidence that the Minister referred to, we did invite the government to support our call for legislative changes so that we can have full protection for women and girls from this hidden harm. Virginity testing, as you have heard in Heshu's experience, is rarely an isolated experience of abuse. It's one that's associated with other behaviours that discriminate, abuse, limit or harm women and girls, including honour-based abuse. And this is why we're campaigning to end the practice and to also tackle the shame and stigma that's commonly associated to virginity. It's our belief that every woman has the right to make decisions about their body without the stigma or the shame of discrimination, without pressure to subscribe to gender-based societal norms and without fear of harm. It is absolutely time to ban the evasive practice, the sexist practice of testing a girl's virginity, and to shut down that virginity myth once and for all. As part of this campaign, in addition to improving law and policy, we're really keen to break the myths that perpetuate these harmful notions on virginity and on the hymen. Supporting us to this end is Nimco Ali. Unfortunately, Nimco's had to leave for another engagement. We are running slightly behind, but she's asked me to share with you that she fully is committed to and endorses the Virginity Myth campaign. We've been working closely with Nimco on it, in addition to the child marriage campaign. So I'm going to now welcome our next speaker, who is Charlotte Proudman. Now, Charlotte Proudman, we've been working with for years. I remember when we were working on the forced marriage law and drafting legislation, a decade ago. Well, we've been working with Charlotte and drafting the legislation on banning virginity testing and hymenoplasty very recently. We've also been working very closely with Richard Holden MP, who is tabling an amendment today to the government's health bill that is due for its second reading to include the bill that Charlotte and I at Karma Nirvana have been drafting. Charlotte's currently in court, so she's not able to attend, but she's very kindly shared a video for us to play. So I'm going to hand back to the tech team to play Charlotte's video for you all today.
Thank you so much to Karma Nirvana and Natasha for inviting me to this day of honour. I wish I could be there with everyone in person, but such is the limits of COVID-19. I hope very much next year I get to meet you all. I want to speak with you a little bit about virginity testing in particular, as well as hymenoplasty. I practice as a barrister at Goldsmith Chambers in family law and immigration law, and I specialise mainly in violence against women and girls. And very sadly, I've seen cases that involve so-called virginity testing. In fact, I remember very vividly one case in which a husband applied to the court for a virginity test. He made an actual application for an expert virginity test to be carried out by a medical clinic in this country on his wife to prove that they had not consummated the marriage. He was claiming that because they hadn't consummated the marriage therefore was not valid as such and couldn't be relied upon and would be nullified. Now, the wife in this case, who was my client, was absolutely horrified by the prospect that the family court could order her to undergo a virginity testing in these circumstances. I remember reading and recoiling at the idea that she would have to be, and indeed forced and ordered by the court potentially, to undergo such a test. I was also shocked and staggered to learn that virginity testing takes place to the degree that it does in this country. Of course, I've come across it before in other cases, particularly abroad. Fortunately, in this case, we managed to make very robust submissions that to force her to undergo virginity testing would breach her human rights, certainly, But also there's a wider point to be made here. If virginity testing was a criminal offence, as indeed we're proposing that it is, then that would mean that one would not even entertain ordering someone to undergo such a test. This application couldn't have even been made to the court. But at the moment, as the law stands, there's no reason why an application for a virginity test or even hymenoplasty, in no doubt some exceptional circumstances, could not be made. So that's why I've been working with Natasha and Karma Nirvana and others to make virginity testing and hymenoplasty a criminal offence. Quite clearly it breaches their Article 8, Article 14, Article 3 rights, and certainly it has no place within the law and needs to be made very clear symbolically as well as in practice that this type of testing will not be permitted. Because if we don't and the current situation continues, there's nothing to stop doctors and clinics from making thousands of pounds, perhaps even more, each year from profiteering from the misery of vulnerable girls and women. And what kind of message does that send out that our society tolerates this kind of abuse? It's archaic and it's misogynist, and we must take a strong stance against it, particularly when the United Nations and the World Health Organization condemned many years ago these practices and called upon national governments such as the UK government to criminalise these practices. The time is now, and the time is certainly right. We've worked very hard to draft a bill to make this a criminal offence, and we understand that there is some support from the government, and it's hoped that it will pass through Parliament, and that's with an enormous thanks to survivors that have spoken out about their awful experiences and worked with Karma Nirvana, Natasha and other charities to make this a thing of the past. I would also say that France, for instance, has taken the bold step of attempting to criminalise virginity testing and other forms of abuse of women's right to bodily integrity, and we must follow suit. We must also make this a criminal offence, or we'll be lagging behind fellow nations, and that certainly cannot be right. So today at the Day of Honour, at the Day of Memory, in the name of so many women who've lost their lives to honour-based violence and honour-based abuse and even honour killings, it's right that we reflect upon what more the government can do to end this form of violence against women and girls, and certainly this has to be a positive step in the right direction. So thank you very much for allowing me to speak with you and to share my experiences as a barrister dealing with such cases day in, day out, and I wish you all the very best for today. Thank you. Bye-bye.
We send huge thanks to Charlotte for all of her support. Charlotte is one of the greatest barristers that I know. She's one of our legal advisors to the child marriage campaign as well, and is just always so willing to support the cause. So thank you. We're so grateful to Charlotte. As part of today, we're launching our Virginity Myths briefing. The link to our latest briefing is available on our website, and we'll be putting it in the Q&A link on here today. As I mentioned, Richard Holden MP will be tabling an amendment on this issue today, which is why he's not able to come and speak. I think he'll be there any moment now. So please do look out for this, and we'll be sharing a video of Richard on our socials a little bit later on today. There are so many ways that members of our audience can get involved, so please do contact our campaigns team to find out more. So we're now on to showcasing our vision for the next 3 years. We're going to be showing on the PowerPoint the priorities and talking through our objectives and how we are going to make a difference, because ending honour-based abuse is what motivates us every single day. I'm very aware that our fantastic helpline team are watching this streamed now. They are absolutely a huge part of this vision, and you know they deal with these issues day in, day out, and are the helpline angels is what we refer to them as. But that is what motivates us, ending honour-based abuse and making a real difference for the people that ring that helpline, whether it's a person that's dealing with personal victim experience, or whether it's a survivor that has left and they need support, or it's a professional that wants to know how to get the response absolutely right to the person that they are helping. Whilst our vision to ending honour-based abuse is ambitious, we recognise that it's not impossible. Our new strategy focuses on bringing the issue of honour-based abuse into the mainstream. We want to make it everyone's business. For the next 3 years, our vision is to see honour-based abuse universally, quantitatively and politically represented and understood in the UK. We will close the data gaps. You've heard from Anne. Anne is going to be closing those gaps and building the data picture, providing a reliable evidence base of both the problem and the solution and how we're going to tackle it. Our strategic activities will increase the offer of specialist safe spaces, will improve the response that victims and survivors receive on the front line. Society has been on an unspoken rule for far too long that we're not to talk about honour-based abuse, and we're on a mission to change that, to make it everybody's business. So how are we going to do this? Well, we've committed to 4 strategic priorities over the course of the next 3 years. These are, first, to improve cross-governmental accountability in responding to honour-based abuse as a form of domestic abuse within a wider VOG framework to influence policy, law and practice responses on the ground. We're committed to shining the spotlight on honour-based abuse across every government department. Currently, the Home Office are tackling this quite a lot, but the Department of Education, Department of Health, Department for Social Care all have responsibilities. So we want to see that accountability, and we want every level of government to recognise that honour-based abuse is a form of domestic abuse. And most importantly, we're committed to ensuring that the survivor voice is at the heart of and represented within law, policy and practice response. Our second priority is around training. We're going to train frontline responders to improve identification, understanding and responses. We know that the right response to honour-based abuse can save lives, and our goal is to reset how frontline practitioners recognise, perceive and understand and respond to honour-based abuse, building upon professional confidence so that the people that need that response on the ground only get the very best. Our third priority is to develop a national data set to better understand the scope, scale and prevalence of and appropriate responses to honour-based abuse. We're committed to developing a reliable national data set. We believe that a stronger evidence base on honour-based abuse will improve representation and understanding. It will enable a more robust framing of honour-based abuse as a form of domestic abuse rather than a form of religion or culture or traditional harmful practice, which only seeks to segregate the issues and deprioritise honour-based abuse from the mainstream. So we're really keen to show through data that this is actually a form of domestic abuse and we need to be tackling it in the same way that we are more broadly tackling domestic abuse, recognising the unique challenges that victims face. And our fourth priority, really importantly, is to increase the number of specialist safe spaces that exist for victims and survivors to speak out. We're committed to increasing those spaces for survivors and victims of honour-based abuse in both their short-term and long-term recovery. You heard Nicole speak earlier about the mapping exercise that has been undertaken. We will be feeding into that because we want to map and know actually how many spaces are available to victims if they reach out. And in our third year of our strategy, we're going to map evidence growth attributable to our work. We want to know in year 1 how many spaces there are, and we want to more than double that by year 3. Central to this, and again Nicole had addressed this, is that we really ensure that we're sustaining these spaces, that we're not just creating spaces that don't have any longevity. This is about sustaining and embedding these safe spaces for victims to reach out into. So the important question is, what will be the outcome of these priorities? What can you expect to see over the course of the next 3 years? For us, In achieving our priorities, this will mean that honour-based abuse is represented as a form of domestic abuse. Now, our theory of change is within our strategy. It's available on our website. I'm not going to talk you through all of this, but just pull out some of the top lines. But you'll see that honour-based abuse is represented as a form of domestic abuse. There's no doubt about it. It's not religious, it's not cultural, it is domestic abuse. It will also mean that the issues are better understood and reflected in government policy, law and practice. You will also and can expect to see improved responses on the front line, improved identification, increased confidence in responding, and with this you'll see a heightened level of reporting of honour-based abuse. This isn't about it happening more, it's just that we're getting better at responding to it and identifying it. It will also mean that for the first time we'll have a reliable data set capturing the true scope, scale and prevalence of it, and not just from a single agency perspective. We'll be capturing it from a full picture response. We currently have the annual data return for police, which gives a policing and crime perspective, but we will be building on that picture and getting a health perspective, a social care and education perspective too. You will find that the data gaps will become smaller and the data picture will become larger. We will know more about who this is impacting, what their unique experiences are, and how we need to, on the back of that, respond to it. And most importantly, by the end of 3 years, there will be more sustained specialist spaces available for victims and survivors to speak out. So that's what you can set to see. So as I said, the detail of this work and our planned activities year by year is in our strategy. You can find that on our brand new website, which we've launched today. There are many, many ways that you in our audience, we've got 130 people here today, many ways that you can support and contribute to this. This is a collective picture. And on our next slide, this is a really, really important message. Together, we will end honour-based abuse. This is about being collective and working together and collaborating. You'll see that that's really embedded into our values, and that's something that we want to do more of. So please do reach out to us and find out how you can contribute to this vision. Now, before we move on to our Q&A and our final speaker, we're going to play a short clip titled A Time to Remember. In this clip, we'll be spending a few minutes honouring the memories of those that we have lost in the name of so-called honour. So cue the clip. The clip is a stark reminder that we all have a role to play, whether it's in prevention or whether it's reaching out to offer support or sharing key messages like help is available so that people can reach out before it's too late. It's quite emotional to see that and to see the lists of names which go on, and many of these deaths in the name of honour haven't been acknowledged in that way, so it's really, really vital that we do call this out, we do recognise it in its framework of domestic abuse. We're coming to the end of today. Before I invite our final speaker, we've got 10 minutes to answer a few of the questions posed during today's event. So I'm just going to look at some of the questions. There's a question for Nicole, if you are here and able to answer the question. Let me...
Yes, I'm still here.
Perfect. So Nicole, the question in the chat is, what work is being done to work with schools to add healthy relationships, talk about forced marriage and honour-based abuse to the teaching curriculum? A lot of young people discuss relationships with their peers, but there's a lack of support and awareness. So over to you to answer that.
I think it's such a good question, and it is something that like everything, it feels like it's a bit of a work in progress. So we know that schools, through primary and secondary schools, have now a mandatory requirement to cover kind of age-appropriate modules in relation to relationship education within PSHE. So that's been a really positive requirement that's now mandated. People have argued and campaigned for that for years. And the question is with the disruption in schools this year, to what extent has that really been embedded? And I have been saying, and particularly I'm hoping to see something within the VOG strategy, or the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy we've talked about earlier, something that shows some real effort from the Department of Education to understand how that's been rolling out, what have been the challenges and helping to support to address any of those, and also where are the particular areas of good practice in partnering with the right organizations, getting the right, there's one thing to kind of outline what ought to be taught. It's a different thing, as you know, how to teach it well, how to really make sure that safeguarding leads within schools and teachers have confidence to know that, organizations like Karma Nirvana exist and the whole range of other support services. So there's a lot to do to get it right, but I would say, we're in initial stages where at least the expectation is clear. And now I think as we move forward with the COVID and kind of, I don't think we're back to normal. I'm not saying that at all, but I do think we should expect more within the Department of Education to focus on these commitments. So I would like to see that as part of some of the actions across government that Natasha was talking about, the kind of ways across government we want to see some more action and clear work being done. So I would say watch that space, and certainly we will be at the Commissioner's office, and I can imagine Natasha and others will too, and we'll work together as much as we can.
That's great. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you for answering that. I just wanted to invite Pauline. It's not so much a question, but we've had Baroness Sugg in the audience today, and Baroness Sugg has just thanked Farhana for sharing her story and for all that she does for the campaign. Pauline and I had a meeting with Baroness Sugg early this week. I just wondered whether you could talk, Pauline, a little bit about the discussions that we've had with Baroness Sugg and the work that she's doing to support the campaign.
Yes, thanks very much, Natasha. The great thing is that we need somebody to take, once it's done the bill's taken its passage through the House of Commons, it has to go through the House of Lords before it comes back to the House of Commons. And Baroness Sugg actually contacted my office to say she'd be very happy to do that, which is great because as a former minister, She's very, very good at doing taking bills through and understanding processes in the House of Commons and House of Lords. So she's a fantastic ally, and I know we'll be working to make sure she's got as many people supporting it in the House of Lords as possible. And as I said earlier, it should not be party political, but it has to be a Conservative who puts it through. And I hope that there'll be sufficient members in the House of Lords who will totally support her. I know that there's some Lib Dems have been campaigning on it for a while, so they will support, but we need to get other parties on side. So when Natasha said earlier, email your members of parliament, yes, please do that. But also I think it would be quite useful if you know anybody in the House of Lords, particularly in the Labour Party, because they're the, I mean, Conservatives, because it'll be a Conservative bill, they will support it, but Labour might not. So if you know any Labour lords or baronesses, please email them too to say this is not party political, this is for stopping child abuse, and nobody can really go against that. So, I mean, Baroness Seg is going to be working hard to get people on side. I think we can all do our bit too.
Absolutely. Thank you, Pauline, for explaining that. And that's a real great call for people that do have connections to anybody in the House of Lords that can support Baroness Sugg. You know, please do connect with us and we can support you in wording and how to frame the ask. But that's a really important point that you've made there, Pauline. Thank you. We'll just take one more question. There's a question around who will update the data set for honour-based abuse. Will it be similar to the FGM data set? So as it stands, there's only one data set held within government, and that's by the Home Office. So that's policing data on honour-based abuse. And that came out on the 14th of December last year. But actually, in our opinion, at Karma Nirvana really was a poor reflection of the problem. Not all police forces fed into it. And I think it showed that there was a lot of work that we need to do to get forces where they need to be, to recognise the issues before implementing the findings onto a framework. So one of the things that we're planning to do, Anne is leading on this, is getting a data set that can be fed into Karma Nirvana from organisations that are working in the sector, because the reality is victims and survivors will tend to go to those organisations before they go to statutory ones because of their fears. So we want to capture it from every opportunity, yes, at government and statutory level, but also on a sector level as well, so that we're getting that data and collecting it in a non-identifying way to really provide a wider picture as to what the issues are and the scale of the problem. We're already doing that for Karma Nirvana, but our offer to the UK is share your data with us and we will provide that picture that organisations in the sector can also use to support funding bids when they want to develop services locally for victims of honour-based abuse. So it's about working collaboratively in this together. We don't have any other questions. There's a few other questions for Nicole, but what I will do is I will send those to Nicole's office and get a response, and we can get those responses back. So we're now at the end of today's fantastic event, which leaves us with our final speaker. For those of you that are aware of Karma Nirvana, our life work and our journey, our next speaker requires very little introduction. So I'm very honoured to invite our next speaker to close today's event, our founder, Jasvinder Sanghera. Thank you.
Thank you, Natasha. Wow, what can I say? I'm going to start by doing the thank yous first. The first people I want to thank is the Karma Nirvana team. I know exactly how precious your work is, the Karma Nirvana angels, the helpline angels, as you refer to them, Natasha. And without you, there would be no Karma Nirvana. So I've always said you're only as good as your team, and I really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for your work. And I do not underestimate how much work it takes to organise one of these events either, and to keep the National Day of Remembrance on the agenda nationally and internationally.
The next person I would like to thank personally is Pauline Latham. Pauline, thank you for listening to me in 2008, but also thank you for your persistence and for being an individual as a political representative, but as a human being as well, that refuses to look at a closed door. Instead, you find a way of opening that door to continue, and you have supported me throughout the campaign itself, and for that we are thankful. And also thank you to the speakers that took their time today to speak. A special tribute to the survivor speakers. As a survivor myself, Karma Nirvana was born out of a survivor's experience, myself and my sister Rabina. So a personal thanks to you for sharing, and for those speakers who took the time to give videos or contribute to today. Thank you. So I've done the thank yous first because with deep gratitude, that is an immense thank you from all of us at Karma Nirvana. So I want to also reflect on the campaign for the National Day of Remembrance. You know, it started off as a conversation with myself and Louise Court back in 2013. We happened to be at the same meeting, and Louise Court, who was the editor-in-chief of Cosmopolitan magazine at the time, said to me, "So what's new, Jasvinder?" And I said, "Well, I'll tell you what's not happening." And I basically had a long conversation with her, and she sat and listened and just said, "Shafilia Ahmed." I said, "This young girl has been murdered. She's lost her life for having ambitions, for wanting to be educated and be independent. A life has been taken from her for having those ambitions. Unlike many teenagers out there, for being a normal adolescent teenager, she was made to believe that was dishonorable, and that led to unmeted violence from her."
I think we may have lost you there. The screen has just frozen. Technology. I don't know whether you can hear the message, but you may need to sign in and sign back out. We were going so well, weren't we, as well, without any technical glitches up until this point. It is just so typical. So apologies to everybody that we've just lost our closing speaker there, just because I think we've cut out of reception. But I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank you all for being here today, and to thank you for taking the time to shine the spotlight on honour-based abuse. And I really, really hope that, you know, today has been moving for you, but also it's inspired you to want to do something different. I'd really encourage everybody to go to our brand new website that we've launched and look at our strategy and contact our team to find out how you can get involved, because there are so many ways that you can get involved and collaborate. And if there's one thing that you can do today, following today's event, it's about shining the spotlight, it's about taking action, it's about letting people know that this is a form of domestic abuse, this is not culture or religion, and that we all have a responsibility to play. If you are working in the field of domestic abuse, find out what work is being done on honour-based abuse within that framework, and if there is a gap there, work out what you're going to do about it. So I think I've just got a message to say that our closing speaker is just going to log back in. So hopefully in a few moments, there we go, she'll be able to rejoin us. And I've kind of bridged that gap in between. Sorry, back over to you. Reception, technology, pandemic life. I think all of our audience will have been familiar with this at some point over the last 18 months. Okay, I'll put myself on mute. Oh, you're on mute now, though.
All I'm going to say is, those people who know me know you cannot get rid of me that easily. So yeah, I was just reflecting on, and thank you for staying on the call, the Britain Lost Women campaign in 2015. The point is, a conversation with somebody who was editor-in-chief of Cosmopolitan magazine led to a conversation to think about developing this as a concept and an idea. And that, like so many, required the hearts and minds of people to think, yeah, do you know what? This is a real issue. We've got to tackle this. For me personally, Shafilia Ahmed was the one case that moved me deeply. They all do, but this one in particular, because she was born the same year as my daughter. She had the same ambitions of my daughter to be a lawyer. The difference here is I get to see my daughter graduate, marry, have children, etc. Shafilia's never going to have that. And the other side of this was the fact that when Shafilia was murdered by her parents, there was no outcry in that community. There was a deafening silence that existed. So it was so important to raise this level of awareness. And this day marks her birthday and the memory of many others, but it gives us that opportunity to revisit the campaign, to keep on talking about this. And I hope that from today, you'll continue the conversation. Most of us take our freedom for granted. Thousands don't have that choice. In fact, it's a luxury for them. And when they are taken from us, we should all be standing up and screaming and shouting, because their experiences should touch us to the core of our being as a society. And we've still got a long way in terms of doing that. I want to say to you, please answer that question. Pauline mentioned doing something today. Natasha has as well, others have. What can you do? What can you do from today? The first thing to do is the plea to write to your representatives in the House of Lords. Pauline has mentioned Labour Party. If you can identify people there in the House of Lords, please write to them and ask them to join the campaign. Visit the website, the brand new Karma Nirvana website, and look at the raft of campaigns you can give support to, but equally organise yourselves in a way whereby you can raise awareness within your own organisations, get posters, ensure your organisation is aware of the helpline, make this part of your business and not part of any other business on the agenda. We want to be on the pitch, not on the sidelines. One of the things that I used to always smile at when I was in a meeting was when we were talking about domestic abuse, people were not talking about these issues. And when I opened my mouth, they went, oh, right, that's part of the agenda. Yes, it is. But what we need to be doing is we need to be mainstreaming it. So I'm not going to go on anymore because I know that I've lost connection at that point, Natasha, and you came in and saved me. I do want to say this to you. This day would not be possible without your support. The reaching of victims would not be possible without your commitment to this cause and the support of all the campaigns you've heard about today. That support is invaluable to getting the ear of government in reaching victims. Please know that we at Karma Nirvana see you as a friend, and we want you to continue that friendship. And with that, Natasha, I will hand over to you and thank you all for taking part today.
Thank you so much. So, delegates, you've had some inspiring, powerful words there of actions that you can take away. We'll be looking out for your tweets and your social media messages and retweeting every single one that we see. So over to you now to make a difference. And remember, we'll be hosting a bigger event next year. As my 7-year-old says, are we going to do it in real life, Mum, or is it virtual? Because that is such the world that we live in at the moment, but it'll be a real event next year. So please save the date for the 14th of July 2022. We look forward to seeing you all there, and thank you all again for being part of today. Goodbye, everybody.